Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Chapter 4 of The Secret of Scarlett Cove. Today's chapter is called Lunch on the Loop. A warm summer breeze set leaves dancing as Alex steered his bicycle into the parking lot of the Refuge Visitor Center. All around him, sunburned tourists with binoculars were climbing out of their cars and unloading bicycles, eager to begin their adventure on the wildlife trails. Children called to each other while young couples huddled around open bird books, trying to decide if the duck they had seen out in the pond beside the marsh trail was the bufflehead or the hooded merganser. The unmistakable whistle of the towhee echoed from the trees above-head, while deep in the forest a wood thrush warbled its soul-stirring song. Alex had two reasons for being at this place at this time. First, he wanted to talk with the refuge ranger, a man he felt might help him come up with a plan for stopping the Navy testing of the powerful and potentially damaging sonar. Second, he was hoping to catch a glimpse of his mother and the man who had presumed, wrongly of course, that he deserved to spend an entire day in her presence. Alex jammed the front tire of his bicycle between the wooden slats of the bike rack and headed for the center, determination lifting each step. Up until this morning, Shikatine could boast only one defender of dolphins. Now the number had doubled. Knock, knock. Alex tapped his knuckles against the door labeled Ranger. A male voice called out, "Come in." He stepped inside the office and found himself standing before a small, cluttered desk and a man eating lunch from a paper bag. "What can I do for you?" the man asked. He was middle-aged, tanned by years spent in the out-of-doors. He wore close-cropped hair and a friendly smile. A khaki shirt hung from broad shoulders, and a thick lettuce, tomato, and cheese sandwich waited near his mouth. A small placard facing his desk announced that his name was Mike Host. "Oh, I'm sorry," Alex said, backing away. "I didn't want to disturb your meal." "Don't worry about it," the ranger said, motioning toward a metal chair resting under a large picture of a flock of snow geese flying over a flat, swampy area. Photographs of assorted wildlife populated all four walls, and a slow-turning ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. Alex sat down and grinned. "Nice office," he said. "I like the pictures." The man nodded while taking a bite from his sandwich. "Took most of them myself," he said, between chews. "I can't decide which I like best, looking at animals or listening to animals. So I fill my office with pictures and leave the windows open. That way I can do both." Alex knew right away that he'd found a kindred spirit in this man. He, too, simply couldn't get enough wildlife into his life. "I gotta ask a question." "Shoot." Alex frowned slightly. "It's kind of complicated." "Okay." "Well, I want to stop the Navy." Ranger Host blinked. "Stop them from doing what?" "From testing their new sonar out in Tom's Cove." The man sat in silence for a long moment, studying the face of his young visitor. "Why do you want to do that?" he asked slowly. "Because of the wine glass." "Wine glass?" Alex leaned forward and explained in careful detail what he'd learned that very morning about sound waves and beached whales and the potential danger of the Surtas system and how it could bring disaster in the world's oceans. The words flooded out of him like water over a dam. All the ranger could do was sit and listen, feeling the deep passion of his visitor. Listening to Alex's heartbreak as he told about the dead dolphin and the mysterious girl, their visit to the old man in the fishing shack, and the cries echoing over the fence at Chilson's Fantasyland. He nodded from time to time as the story continued, his sandwich uneaten, his lunch ignored. When Alex had finished, the ranger leaned back in his chair and studied him thoughtfully. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. Alex shook his head. "I don't know. Something. Anything. I thought you'd understand because you're a ranger and all, and rangers love animals. All animals, right?" "Most do. That describes me." Host reached across his desk and swiggled a framed photograph around to face Alex. "And that certainly describes my daughter." Alex gasped. The picture showed two people walking along the bank. One was Ranger Host. The other was the young girl with short blonde hair under a baseball cap. She was looking up at her father, her face filled with love and admiration. "Dusty," Alex breathed. "Dusty, is your daughter?" "Yep." the ranger said softly. And you're right. She's one strange creature. The man picked up the photograph and gazed at it intently. This was taken a couple years ago, after my wife, her mother, died. We were both feeling kind of lost, but life goes on. He gently placed the picture back down on his desk and turned to face Alex. I hope she didn't scare you too much. Alex grinned. Not too much, just a little. Ranger host cleared his throat. I know about the testing. I read it in the newspaper this morning. But now I'm sure Dusty has seen it too. But there doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're hardly in a position to tell the U.S. Navy what they can and can't do. But, Alex countered, their new sonar is hurtful to your wildlife. Their sonar has the potential for hurting our wildlife, the man corrected. Besides, we don't know conclusively that your dolphin was killed because of the test. Like you, I believe that's probably what happened, but we don't have proof. And even if we did, the Department of Defense will say that national security outranks the health and well-being of a few marine mammals any day. It may be harsh, but it's the way things are. I appreciate your concern. He paused. Alex, the boy said. My name is Alex. I appreciate your concern, Alex, but I'm afraid my hands are tied. There's really nothing I can do. Alex nodded and slowly rose to his feet. Thank you for listening, he said. I can see that you're a nice man. Ranger host smiled warmly. I'm sorry I can't be of more help. Oh, and if you happen to run into my animal rights activist offspring, tell her that lunch was delicious. She makes a killer cheese on rye, just like her mother used to. Must be the special sauce or something. Alex grinned. I will. With that, he turned and left the room. The wildlife loop, a paved 3-mile path encircling a verdant, flooded marsh, was populated by its usual collection of nature lovers and the animals they'd come to observe, including a scattering of wild ponies for which the island was famous. Alex rode his bicycle slowly, savoring the sights and sounds, enjoying the bright sunlight and fresh breeze blowing in from the nearby beach. The loop had always been his favorite, especially on days like this. It's like heaven here, he told his mother on one occasion as they pedaled side by side along the winding pathway that followed the curves of the water's edge. Except that in heaven the animals won't run and hide if we get close. They'll come right up to us and say hello. Animals will talk in heaven? His mother asked. Sure, I don't see why not. Mrs. Timmons had ridden in silence for a minute or two. Then she'd suddenly pointed. See that least bittern over there? The one with the really attractive yellow legs? Yeah. What do you think it's saying? Alex had thought for a moment. It's saying, what are all these tourists doing in my backyard? His mom had grinned. You're probably right. However, there had always been evidence that the loop wasn't in heaven. The fact was brought home on Alex, even on this perfect day, as he stopped to watch a raccoon relieve a crow's nest of its clutch of eggs and to marvel at the antics of the dead hognose snake. The reptile lay sprawled out on its back beside the path, forked tongue lolling out of its open mouth, limp and still. As soon as everyone had moved on, except Alex, who stood motionless, it quickly turned itself over and slithered away, unharmed. A great blue heron stood in the water not far from the path, staring intelligently at the ripples lapping around its tall, slender legs. All at once it jabbed its long, pointed beak into the water and pulled out a wiggling fish. Tilting its head back, it tossed the fish into the air and let it drop down into its throat. For a few minutes the bird looked like it was suffering from a broken neck, but then the powerful movements of the throat forced the fish down the esophagus and into the heron's stomach. Watching the big bird enjoy his snack reminded Alex that he too was kind of hungry, so he rode on. By the time he reached Shoveler Pool, a swampy area home to dozens of mallards, Canadian geese, and an assortment of wading birds, his stomach was telling him in no uncertain terms that it was time to eat. He parked beside a thick, high-backed wooden bench that faced away from the path toward the pool, and dug his meal from the backpack fastened securely to his bicycle handlebars. Settling himself on the bench, he carefully withdrew the remaining peanut butter and jelly sandwich, small carton of milk, and plastic bag filled with carrot and celery sticks. He decided to save his 2 granola bars until last. As he ate, he was careful not to let any paper or food scraps fall to the ground where they'd be picked up by wandering squirrels or curious birds. He understood the dangers that trash and processed foods posed to furry and feathered animals. While he enjoyed his lunch, groups of people ambled by behind him, talking softly, calling out the names of the birds or animals they were able to identify. A black skimmer flew just above the water with its long bottom bill slicing the surface, waiting to collide with an unsuspecting fish that would suddenly become a meal. Every once in a while, a small cloud of gnats would form in front of Alex's face as if to say, "Hey, are you going to eat that entire sandwich?" Alex would swat in their direction and they'd quickly buzz away, only to regroup and return for another visit. As Alex was about to open his bag of carrots, he heard a familiar voice nearby. "Isn't this lovely?" a female said from her perch on a bicycle. "Do you come here often?" "Not as much as I'd like to," a male voice answered. Alex lifted his feet off the ground and huddled against the bench. Carefully, he turned and peered over the top of the path not far away. Sure enough, he saw his mom astride her old squeaky 3-speed, smiling, pointing, and having what looked like a terrific time. Alex grinned. Of all the sights in the world he loved most, it was seeing his mother smile. It made him feel so happy inside. The man she was with rode what was obviously a very expensive road bike with lots of shiny chrome and custom paint job. The bike's spokes sparkled as he approached, and the artistically curved handlebars boasted a second set of brake levers and, of all things, a portable GPS device. Alex shook his head and laughed softly to himself. Certainly you wouldn't want to go riding the refuge trails without the benefits of satellite navigation. As the two rode by, Alex glanced at the man's face and suddenly dropped back down behind the bench. That face. He'd seen it before, only it hadn't been floating over an expensive road bike. It had been attached to a man driving a very expensive powerboat, one that had almost run over Dusty and him out in the middle of Tom's Cove. Alex closed his eyes and let out a frustrated groan. This wasn't possible. The guy his mother was spending the day with was none other than Brent Chilson, a person whom Alex knew considered dolphins nothing more than inventory, and who went around threatening anyone who dared get in his way, including young girls and their hapless passengers. Alex raised his head for another look. The two had stopped beside the road and were watching a family of wood ducks swimming by the edge of the broad marsh. Alex retrieved his binoculars and lifted them slowly to his eyes. As his mother's face came into sharp focus, he could see that she was smiling, laughing, and having a wonderful time. He could even hear her soft, sweet giggles as they drifted in his direction. Whenever she glanced at her male companion, her look was trusting, innocent, totally honest. But there was something else in her glance. Alex let another groan escape his throat as he realized what it was. She liked this guy. She really liked him and wasn't afraid to show it. Alex lowered the binoculars and let his head fall back against the bench. Of all the single men in the entire world, she had to fall for the biggest creep on Chincoteague. The thought made his stomach turn. Now he had two large problems to contend with. One was the U.S. Navy mixing it up with the dolphins in Tom's Cove. The other was a genuine Neanderthal trying to mix it up with his one and only mother. Alex turned to see the pair ride away, following the wide path as it curved back along a tall stand of trees. Both problems would have to be dealt with immediately. There was no time to waste, because Alex knew that the playful dolphins and his sweet mother were facing dangers of epic proportions. Both needed saving, and they needed saving fast. Alex had just passed the toll gates guarding the entrance to the refuge and was headed for the bridge spanning the Ossateague Channel when he heard a horn beep. He glanced over at the road paralleling the bike path and saw a mud-stained pickup truck with the words U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service printed on the side. Ranger Ho sat behind the wheel, and beside him, grinning broadly, was Dusty. "Need a lift?" the man called. Alex nodded and slowed to a stop. "Hey, thanks," he responded as he hurried over to the shoulder of the road. "It's a long way back to Chincoteague when you're on a bicycle. Hi, Dusty." The girl jumped out of the pickup and helped him lift his bike into the truck bed. My dad told me you stopped by to see him, she said. I talked to Doc Foster and he got me all fired up about saving dolphins, Alex said. I really like him when he's not, being weird. Yeah, I know, Dusty said as the two clambered into the cab and fished for their seatbelts. Each year he gets a little weirder, but sometimes he's as sane as I am. Now there's a comforting thought, Ranger Host teased as they pulled back onto the road and headed toward the bridge. Dusty reached over and punched her father's arm. Very funny, she said. Ouch, the man groaned with a wince. Nice right cross. You been working out? Dusty lifted her arm and hid her face behind her tightly clenched fist. Come on, Mr. Ranger Man, she urged. I can take you any time. You won't know what hit you. Ranger Host glanced over at Alex. Here's a girl who can make a fantastic cheese sandwich and then beat it to a pulp. I believe she'll make some professional wrestler a very nice wife someday. Dusty delivered more punches to the cowering ranger's defenseless arm and ribs. Wife? I'm not going to be anybody's wife, she protested as she pummeled her dad. I'm going to be president or king or CEO of some big company. Being a wife is for wimps. Alex grinned as he watched the father and daughter spar with each other. Their faces reflected the same expressions he'd seen in the photograph on the ranger's desk earlier that day. Expressions of love and the simple joy of being together. He knew they'd been through a horrible experience, the loss of a wife and a mother, but somehow they survived. And even in the cab of the mud-stained truck making its way toward the town of Chincoteague, it was obvious that they did their best to enjoy life in spite of the heavy sadness they carried deep inside their hearts. So, Alex said, interrupting his companion's playful banter, tell me more about this Mr. Chilson. He's a scumbucket, the girl said. Dusty Host, the ranger responded in a firm voice. Don't talk like that. Chilson isn't breaking any laws. He's just trying to make a living like the rest of us. He deserves respect, even though we may not agree with what he does. Dusty nodded. Okay, I'm sorry, she said softly. But, Dad, he takes dolphins away from their natural habitat and puts them in a tank with a bunch of tourists. Would you like that? The ranger chuckled. Most tourists I met are perfectly nice and wouldn't harm a flea, he said. I mean, Alex here is a tourist, and he loves dolphins, don't you, Alex? Their passenger nodded. Absolutely. So does my mom. See? The people who go into the tank at Fantasyland are just trying to have a good time. They're not setting out to harm the world's marine mammal population. Dusty frowned. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing any good. I passed out all my papers and people still go there. Not everyone, her father counted. You probably won't find Alex or his mom jumping into that tank. And I certainly won't go. Who knows, maybe a lot of people think twice about visiting Chilson's Fantasyland because of what you say and do. Besides, if what you do didn't make any difference, Chilson wouldn't get so upset whenever you write something in the paper or get the townspeople all stirred up. If he's mad, that tells me you just might be cutting into his bottom line. Dusty said thoughtfully. Maybe I am making a difference. Ranger Host steered the truck off Maddox Street and onto Main Street. Something else, sweet daughter of mine, he continued, glancing down at the girl sitting behind him. I know you'd be making your mother very proud right now. She loved dolphins, remember? She loved painting pictures of them and selling them to the tourists who came to the island each summer. It was her way of sharing their beauty with the world. If she were alive and saw you passing out those papers and writing stories and taking a stand against the abuse of these beautiful creatures, I know she'd be proud. So very proud. Dusty sat silent for a moment. When she spoke, her words were heavy with longing. Daddy, tell me again what you called her when no one else was around. You know, your special name for her. The ranger smiled. It was silly. One night we rented an old movie and stayed up late watching it. Your mother was pregnant with you and couldn't sleep. It was one of those Civil War sagas with handsome soldiers and beautiful Southern belles running around through burning cities and such. Anyway, the main female character had a lot of spunk, and I said, hey, she's just like you. And from then on, whenever your mother got all riled up about something, I would call her that special name. Alex leaned forward, a shy grin lighting his face. What'd you call her? He asked. Ranger Host smiled and studied the distant skies. I called her Scarlett. Dusty leaned her head against her father's arm and stared at the passing scenery for a while. Scarlett, she repeated. The truck moved slowly down the street, heading for the center of town. On each side stood small antique shops, stately refurbished Victorian homes with bed and breakfast signs planted on carefully clipped lawns, and gaudy storefronts filled with kites, fishing gear, and sweets. As they drove past Chilson's Fantasyland, Dusty sat up and pointed. "Look," she said, "there goes Chilson himself with some poor lady. Probably suckered her into coming to see his place of business. I hope that dolphin slaps her with a flipper." "Dusty," Ranger Host warned with a frown, "don't say such things. That woman just wants to have a good time during her vacation, and swimming with a bunch of dolphins sounds like fun. I don't like it when you make fun of innocent people." Dusty nodded and sighed. "You're right, Daddy. They don't know what they're doing, but Chilson sure does." Alex tried to make himself small by slipping down into a seat as they drove by the laughing woman and her male companion. As soon as they passed the entrance, he turned to his seatmate. "Dusty, it's very important to me that you don't think that all tourists are dumb," he said. She nodded. Okay, I'm sorry. You're a tourist, and I don't think you're dumb. And I'm sure your mom isn't dumb either. I mean, you guys wouldn't be caught dead visiting Chilson's place, right?" "Right," Alex repeated with a glance back toward Fantasyland. On the south edge of the town sat the neat and orderly Chincoteague Coast Guard Station. Stately boats of varying sizes sat moored at the docks, their white hulls and bold red stripes making them look efficient and businesslike. A man in a neatly pressed uniform met the truck at the gate, guarding the entrance. "We're here to see Lieutenant Reeve," the driver of the truck announced. "He's expecting us." The man checked the clipboard he was carrying. "Yes, sir, Ranger Host. I see here that the lieutenant was scheduled to see you, but something came up and he sends his apologies." "What came up?" The uniformed man stiffened. "It's top secret, Navy business." "Does it have anything to do with the testing of the new low-frequency active sonar?" Dusty asked, looking the man straight in the eye. The guard blinked. How do you know about that?" Dusty rolled her eyes. "It was in the newspaper. You do read, don't you?" Ranger Host frowned down at the girl and looked back at the guard. "What my sweet young daughter very ill-manneredly tried to say is that the town is aware of the surtask LFA testing on Tom's Cove, and we just wanted to talk to your station lieutenant about it, that's all. We'll check back later. He's a friend of ours, and we fully understand that the demands here at the station take precedence over a social call. You've been very kind. Thank you." The guard nodded hesitantly. "You're welcome, sir." Dusty leaned forward and pointed. "Is that the boat they're on?" she asked as the station's 40-foot motor boat, or MLB as it was called, edged out of the bay a quarter-mile away. "Sorry, can't tell you that," the man said. "Testing operations are top secret." With that, he turned smartly on his heel and marched back to the guardhouse. Ranger Host turned to his companions as he steered the car back to Main Street. "We'll catch with the lieutenant another time." "Wait," Dusty said. "Would you mind taking Alex and me to Doc Foster's?" "Sure, I'll drop you off and you can have a nice visit." He turned the truck at the next intersection and headed inland, crossing the island along quiet residential streets lined with old fisherman houses and new ranch-style structures. As soon as they arrived at the line of shacks fronting the channel on the far side of the island, Dusty and Alex jumped out and retrieved their bicycles from the truck bed. "Thanks, Dad," the girl called over her shoulder. "I'll be home for supper. Try not to burn anything." Her father waved as he drove back down the street and out of sight. "Come on," Dusty called as she leaned her bike against a tree and hurried down the sidewalk toward the ancient docks. "We don't have much time." "Time for what?" Alex asked as he noticed the girl's fishing boat tied between two pilings. Dusty quickly unfastened the rope and hopped inside. "Well, are you coming or not?" she asked. "Where are we going?" "For a little ride." "Great," Alex said, stepping down into the front of the boat and thrusting his arms through the straps of the life vest. "Are we heading for your secret cove?" "Nope." "Up the channel to the bridge?" "Not today." "Then where are we going?" Dusty gave a sharp tug on the starter rope. "We're going to stop something." "Stop what?" With a twist of the throttle, she sent them flying out into the channel, glistening spray spreading out on both sides of their speeding boat. "The United States Navy," she shouted over the piercing whine of the engine. Alex gripped the edge of the widely swaying vessel and held on tightly. "I was afraid you were going to say that," he moaned. And that's the end of Chapter 4. We'll be back tomorrow with Chapter 5. Thanks for listening.